Quick introduction. Helga and I both work together and contribute to the Animating an Engine initiative. I'm Chase Cooper, and I'm the product manager for rigging tools in Unreal Engine, and I have a history in film and games. Helga Matti leads the development of the control rig feature set for rigging up characters with a background in both film as well as in software engineering. So in this talk, we'll take a look at Modular Control Rig, a new approach for setting up character rigs inside of Unreal Engine as of 5.4. Control Rig was built as the foundation for character rigging, but it's quite a technical tool set. Modular Control Rig aims at making setting up characters for animation less technical, faster, and fun. Let me also state that all the demos shown in this talk can be tried on the demo workstation at the Unreal Engine booth, so you can come by and play with them, or I can give you a demo. So if you ever worked in a larger production, or you've created an animation in a small group or by yourself, no doubt you came across a rigging system. DCCs sometimes offer this out of the box, but Maya, for example, doesn't ship a default rigging system. There's a myriad of options, some of which you may be familiar with, such as MGear, Baguette, Advanced Skeleton, etc. So do we really need yet another one? First of all, we didn't have one native to Unreal. Secondly, though, they're quite constrained by the environments they operate in. Control Rig being much more flexible, so we figured we can improve things on the modular rigging front as well. So common uses for rigging systems are bipeds and humanoid characters. The first example is the character Decker from the Paragon dataset, which you can find this character on the Epic Games Marketplace if you'd like to grab this one. Decker felt like a good choice since she has a custom weapon, so we can take a look at rigging up the biped rig first, and then we'll take a look at how to rig the weapon using Modular Control Rig.
Hey guys, so let's take a quick look at how we would go about building a biped rig using the modular rig features found in 5.4 of Unreal Engine. I've chosen the Decker Paragon asset for a couple of reasons, but mainly because she's available on the marketplace, so you can just download the asset and try it yourself. There's also a staff in this asset, right? A weapon, which is a bit beyond the normal biped, and I want to show you how we would go about setting something like that up. I'm not going to add the weapon just for now. We'll start focusing only on the biped rig. So let's get going. So we'll go to the content browser, right click on the skeletal mesh, and I'll say create modular rig. This will create the asset for me and fill in the skeletal mesh and also add a root module. So let's go ahead and talk about the UI and what we have access to here. So at the very top left, we have the module assets, which is sort of the list of modules that are available to us in this project. This may look a bit different than what you're familiar with from vanilla 5.4, mainly because in this project I've added a couple more modules that I built for the talk. At the bottom left, you have the module tree that gives you access to all the modules that make up your character rig. Here you can change your connectors, and we'll get to that in a second. You can click on them to get to the details, to reconfigure each module, like change colors and settings on the module, and so on. And then the far right up here, you have the rig hierarchy, which is the very granular sort of tree that shows you the result of the modular rig build, right? So this will show you the bones, obviously, but also everything else that got added to the character as we're building out the rig. So let's go ahead and start building out this character. I'll start by bringing in the spine as the first module to add. So as I drag the spine of the character, you can see a couple of things happen. First of all, the spine gets added to the bottom list here. You can also see it has these things that look like plugs. They're connectors, and they basically say or describe how the module is wired into the character, how it's connected. You can also see the connectors in their resolvable state in the rig hierarchy here. You can see these blue boxes. They sort of tell you where the spine start bone is and so on, right? We also see in this overlay, using these circles, which is called the schematic view, we can see these sockets pop up. These are the connection points you can use to drag new modules onto. So we see these pop up as we add the spine, right? And obviously we also have controls that just got added. So I can go ahead and start posing the character already. I can try it. See, yeah, my spine is working, right? Great. There's also hotkeys, just so you know, for the schematic. So the Y key hides and unhides the schematic, and the T key hides and unhides the controls if you want to try things out. Great, so let's zoom in a bit, and we'll continue with our build. So the next thing I'm going to add is the neck. Then I'm going to add the shoulder. Then I'm going to add the arm. Looking down, I'll add the leg. And finally, I'll add the foot. Great, so now we have So the left side done, as you can see. What I'm now going to do is I'm actually going to rename these guys and call the shoulder left, arm left, leg left, and foot left, right? Now that I've done this, I can select these 4 modules that make up the limbs on the left side, right click, and say mirror from left to right. Great, so now our character is set up. The basic biped, arguably the basic biped, is done. You can see how if I hide the schematic, we have controls now for the arms, the legs. Each one of these modules is configurable, so if you go to details, you can choose if you want IK by default or FK by default, etc. And so many other things you can configure. But in short, this is the setup of the biped. We'll carry on with the weapon in the next section.
So since Decker has a weapon staff with lots of articulation, we want to rig that up as well. For this, we use one of the default modules that ships with 542 and a custom one which adds the functionality of a single axis hinge.
So now that we have the biped, let's take a look at the weapon. The weapon is a bit trickier, right? Because it's not a default kind of thing that the modules understand immediately. And that starts with even the sockets. There's no socket on the weapon itself that get determined. So what we'll do is we'll actually go ahead and find the right arm, and under that there's a weapon bone. You can see here, weapon, and it has staff and everything under it. So I'll right click on this and say create a new socket here. You can see given the socket is selected, it's orange in the view here, and so this is the root sort of the weapon itself. So I'm going to add the most basic module that we have called the add control to it, which is just adding a single control. So I'll add this in. It will position this guy, and then let me actually collapse a couple things here. Collapse the leg, and I'm going to reparent this add control to the right arm. Right. One thing that happens is you can see it turns red. The other thing is it gets reparented differently. Right. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change the parent controls connector here to say I want this control for the weapon to be nested under the hand. So I'll say under the right control of the hand. So if you look at now the hierarchy that gets built, if you scroll down, you can see that the right hand, if you can find it, here has the weapon underneath. Right, there we go. The FK control in this case. So yeah, there we go. And here's our staff, right? I'll hide the schematic. Great. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to add more modules to be able to interact with all the articulation points of the staff. So to do that, I'm actually going to use a module that I added for this project called the hinge. And the hinge is nothing more but a single control with a single axis of rotation, right? So this only allows you to animate something on one axis. Later in the talk, we can talk about how we set up modules. It's very easy, and you can do that yourself as well. So I'll just drag this guy in, and I have to show the schematic again, of course. So I'll drag this guy in. And I'll start with, actually zoom out like this a bit. So I'll add it to this bone, right? I'm also going to parent it under the add control, and I'm also going to say that it needs to be under the weapon control. So it's parented correctly. I'm going to do that again, I think with, say, that guy over here. Why not? I'm going to parent it under the previous hinge, and I'm going to say that I want you to be parented under the first hinge. Great. Let's do it one more time. So I'll drag this guy over here and add it for the front here. Again, I'm going to add it to the add control to parent it there accordingly, and then I'm going to change the parent to the weapon again. If I can type, sorry about that. Great, so now we have all these hinges set up. As you can tell though, hopefully, they're not on the right axis. So we'll go ahead and change that. So I'll select these two, go to the details panel, and switch it over to the right axis, which is X. Oh yeah, that was lucky. And then the other one is Y. Great, and there we have it. So we'll hide the schematic, move this guy down a bit, select these two single axis controls, turn them in. You can see how now I can pose up my character. Here I have a hinge I can use to rotate the front of the staff, and so on. So I'm not going to do the rest of the stuff. You can see there's many more articulation points, but this hopefully gives you an idea that once you have built a module which is relatively general purpose, you can plug together these characters by adding modules and pairing them to each other quickly, and animate props and bipeds alike. And as promised, here's a small scene with Decker. So the first part of the animation has been hand keyed, and then the second part is an emote that we added here and we sort of inverted onto. So you can see at any point here in this animation, I can click on Decker and I can pick, the rig and adjust the posing as needed. So everything's always live. If I exit the cinematic camera, it's even a bit easier. Right, yeah. So like I said, everything's always live. With these rigs, you can animate in context, with the lighting and everything applied, and that gives you the power of sort of animating characters without having to go to graphs, but using the modules to click together sort of the structure you need for animation. Yeah, and move on with your day. Thank you.
So why did we go for this approach? Seems like the normal entity component approach within the outline is similar, yet a bit different, no? So rigging is hard, but it doesn't have to be. So historically, to rig a character can take years of institutional knowledge and sometimes the understanding of complex mathematics. Technical riggers are a rare breed. You have to learn a lot. Control rig is powerful, but we do know it has a steep learning curve and is very intimidating to a lot of folks. Low-level concepts and math, such as quaternions, are not everyone's cup of tea. Iteration is slow. Well, it's not that slow, given we have a real-time, what you see is what you get editor, but it's still slower than what we were aiming for. So you have to do the same thing over and over again. So modular control rig takes a stab at trying to solve this by adding a playfulness to the rigging process. Modular control rig is about assembling a character from parts and focusing more on the final animation and less on complex granular graphs. Inside modular control rig, we can author modules using the full power of the control rig framework. So as I hinted before, plugins for DCC offer some of this functionality. The concepts are somewhat known by now. Usually it tends to be hard to add a new module, often only possible in a scripting or programming language. So getting to a character rig is slow. Typically, you have to run a script in Maya, wait for a couple of minutes, and eventually you see the rig to test it. But because we are Unreal, we wanted to make everything real time, a rapid iteration in a visual way. So with this system, we focus on two different sets of users, module authors and module users. This provides immediate feedback as you're building the character. You build modules, pose and test, continue to build modules, etc. Keep everything referenced. Rigs are always recreated on the fly so that changes in modules can propagate. Connectors offer rules, so you can make a module connect everywhere, or only in very specific places based on your own requirements. There's a new event as well, the connector event, with which you can build incredibly user-friendly modules that resolve themselves to a subset of candidates and or resolve to a default automatically. It's really easy to build modules. In fact, you can just build a normal control rig and you hit a button and it'll turn it into a module. Arguably, the most important takeaway from this is it's more fun. It brings a kit bashing experience to rigging. So aside from the 95% biped use case, let's look at two quite different examples.
All right, so let's talk about the anatomy of a module and how you build one. So basically what you do is you just build a rig and you can convert it to a module. And there's a couple of things you have to do differently if you're working on a module. So the first thing is that you can't build controls and things like that manually. You have to build them using the construction event procedurally. So you'll see up here that for this rig, which is just sort of a simple pivot rig. So what I've done here is just for the, as an example, we have a right pivot, a left pivot in the center. So I can animate this coin on the right, I can animate it on the left, and I can animate it in the center as layered pivots. The way this is done is there's the pivot right is spawned first, then under that as a child you can see this is the result is used as a parent for the next one. We spawn pivot left and then pivot center, and we're using variables that sit on the rig to configure how far these pivots are apart right now. So there's a variable on this called offset that I can use to say how far these should be apart. So if I change this, you can see how they now travel further apart. Right? And then during forward solve, now because if you have this module multiple times, the names of the controls will differ, and also you don't know what the user has connected the connector to. you have to use the resolval nodes, right? So the get connection will, given your first primary connector in this case, will tell you what's the element in the rig hierarchy that the connector is resolved to, and then that's what I'm setting the transform on. So that will be the bone, the center bone for this coin. Right, so you can sort of see that here in this example view when we're looking at this character. You can see I have the center bone resolved to the pivot target, and these are the controls that get built, right? So talking about connectors, so connectors you can add them yourself. You can add more than one. They can be secondaries and optional. So there's lots of details here that we've documented out. They also have rules that you can define, for example, what they're allowed to connect to in the rig. So they can be allowed to only connect to sockets, which is what we use for most of ours. But they can also be allowed to connect to bones and other things, depending on what you want. In this example, I haven't added any rules, which means this can be connected to anything. That's it. That's basically all you need for the simple module. You build the hierarchy in the construction event. You refer to things using the get connection in the forwards and backwards solve, and that's how you build modules that are generic and can be used sort of as utilities on top of any structure, any skeleton in the modular rig editor. One more thing to note is that there's also a connection event. I want to highlight this. The connection event is used, it's not called get connection, sorry about that. It's get connector, there we go. And that can be used to auto-resolve secondary connectors. So if you have, say, a crocodile tail module, right, and you want your root to be defined and you want to automatically find the tip so the user doesn't have to resolve two connectors, you can do that. All our modules do this, so you're welcome to take a look at the modules that we ship with and take a look. Implementing the connector event makes modules much more user-friendly, so they can be dropped and auto-resolve, and then users can adjust the settings as needed. But the hope is that if you implement this well, you can make the module work on a single sort of drag and drop interaction. That's the goal, right? Anyway, I hope this example wasn't too simple. Yeah, thank you. Hey guys, so here's another example. This is again been animated by my dear friend Frederick Nilsson. Thank you again, Frederick. Frederick is using a technique, sort of a trick that he likes to use for the initial sort of rough motion, which is the mouse pointer capture. We have a video of it, so I may as well show it a bit later. But it's basically a way of capturing the mouse to get rough motion in, and he's used it here to sort of get rough rocking motion on the character. And the other thing you'll notice is that there's sort of secondary animation going on the tail and all the fins. So all that is not hand keyed, the body is keyed and the mouth is keyed, but everything else is secondary animation. Let's take a look at how this character rig works. So I'll bring him up. So as you can see, not too complex of a structure here. We have our main control again, which is just the add control. We have the hinge, the one that we already know for the mouth. And then I've added another implementation of the hinge, which is called the simulated hinge. And basically what that is doing is, rather than directly turning the bone, is doing an intermediate step of sort of simulating towards the goal that you're trying to rotate towards. So it gives you the secondary interpolation. So I can click on all these guys, and while I can still pose up the tail, it automatically has this nice simulation spring interpolation going on. Right, and this is happening to everything, including the fins. So if I turn like this, you can see the fins do the same thing. So not saying that this is the perfect way of animating a shark like this, but I was trying to highlight that you can build modules that do simulation as well. You can deploy them on characters very quickly and help your animators. Of course, these all have settings. So for any of these, I can, in the animation channels, we have control over how strong the simulation is and how much it's blended in. So you can turn it off if you don't want it. And then you just have a normal hinge control. Let's take a quick look at the simulated hinge very briefly. I'll open it up. A little bit later in the talk, we'll talk about the anatomy of a module. So bear with me here, but I just wanted to show you that it's not crazy complicated. So the construction event basically spawns this rotator control. And during the rig simulation, it's doing, rather than setting the transform directly, it performs a spring interpolation and then uses that to set the character's motion. So yes, there's a couple nodes here to build the module, but this is now becoming a versatile tool that you can deploy on any character if you want sort of the single axis rotation spring. Yeah, that's it.
So our colleague Frederick Nielsen animated the shark's motion, as Helga mentioned, with the infamous mouse pointer capture technique. You can do this inside of animation mode within Sequencer. It's pretty cool. There's a few videos out floating around the internet where he demos exactly how to do this. So next, Helge has built one more really fun example use case. Let's take a look.
Let's take a look at another example. So this asset has been animated by my dear colleague Frederick Nielsen. Thank you, Frederick. You can see this scooter sort of scooting around, doing a wheelie, doing a couple of simple animations there, getting to a stop. So let's take a look at how this was animated. So again, any of these can be clicked on and you can get to the rig. You can do edits directly here if you're not in the cinematic camera. Again, it's a bit easier. So there we go. We have all the things we can adjust and interact with the character. Let's take a quick look at the character itself, or this character rig itself, and the features it has, right? So I'll hide the schematic view for now. I'll just focus on the controls that are being used here, or the modules rather. So you can see that tree here isn't crazy. For future releases, we're working on cleaning up the view here a bit and reducing the noise. But for now, you can see that we have the body control, which is an add control, so just a basic thing. We have the hinges that we've seen before. They're used for the steering, right? For these foot pedals, foot rests. We use them for the pedals as well, for the axle and the pedals itself. We also have this suspension here, which is based on a hinge in the back. I've added another sort of version of the hinge module to this project, which is called the slider, which is basically a single axis translation. So same thing, it just allows you to animate just this axis here for the front suspension. And then there's a step up sort of from sorry about that. There's a step up from the hinge, which is called the wheel, right? And the wheel is a module which simulates the character, right? So it has obviously the hinge control, so you can just animate the wheel yourself. But if you animate the wheel in relationship to the world, it will roll automatically. And it records travel and automatically rolls the wheel accordingly. You have a couple of settings on the wheel, like you can add gas to it. So you can say, I want this to turn by itself. To have a spin, I want braking it, I don't know, by 75%. So as I drag this guy around, it doesn't turn all that much because we're stepping on the brakes, right? And so on. So there's many things this has. Again, it's nice to be able to build a module which is a generic wheel, which will hopefully work for many of the cases, and then you can just drag it on and they will start working correctly. Finally, there's some additional modules being used here, which are proxy modules, and those add proxy controls. In this particular case, for pivots. So very briefly, proxies are controls that are used to drive other controls. So there's sort of a mini rig for the rig. And they can be useful if you want to have secondary posing capabilities that are not going to interfere with your keys, right? So in this case, all I want to be able to animate a wheelie. So I've added this proxy that allows me to tilt the character up or turn it up around the rear wheel. I've also added to the front, so they don't fight each other. It's just there's only one active at a time, so you can have as many of these as you want as posing helpers, right? And finally, there's a rather complex, well, not complex, but more involved, I'd say, proxy, which is this main one here, which you can use to pose the whole setup. So it simulates the suspension, it simulates the roll and everything, and you can sort of use it to very quickly set up the character against the ground and other things. So again, it's just sort of a posing utility that you can use to make your animation life easier. Again, if you look at the complexity here, it's maybe 15 modules, maybe 20. So it's something that is manageable, and looking forward to what you guys build with Modular.
Thanks for coming.